Hello, and
Hello.
welcome to another episode of David's Divergent Discussions. I'm your host, David Gray Hammond, and today I'm here with Priscilla, and we're going to talk about neurodivergent people and cults. So it could get dark, just a fair warning for people. Cults are not great.
Nope.
Um, we'll start with brief audio descriptions. I'm David Gray Hammond. I'm a mid-30s white Mediterranean male with a shaved head and a beard. I'm wearing thick-rimmed purpley grey glasses. I have a lip ring and an ear tunnel, and I'm sat in a very blue room next to the bookcase that every time I describe it, I say I will secure it to the wall, and I still haven't. So people are still counting down to the day when it falls on me. Priscilla, would you like to give a brief description?
Myself or just about how I look? Was it? Sorry.
Whatever you want to, but
Okay.
how you look would be
Okay.
helpful. Yes.
Yeah. I'm mixed race. I'm sort of brown, half some bold, half English, so brown skinned, and I've got short hair, cropped dark brown hair, and I'm wearing sort of gold rimmed tortoiseshell ace and tape glasses. And what else? I'm wearing some stone, some earrings, drop earrings, and I've got a turquoise top on, and I'm sitting behind a bookshelf of this is my mum's office, so it's not my books, but it's just a load of religious books. Actually, this is a religious room, I think, of all the religious books. But yeah.
It's funny. My mum has one of those rooms as well because she's a vicar. So if I do things out of her study, I'm just surrounded by theological books.
Yeah, it's just like people just think I'm a born again Christian. It's like, no, this is my mum's books.
So we're here to talk about neurodivergent people and cults, and I guess a good place to start. A lot of people have misconceptions about what cults actually are. So I wonder if you would mind sort of just in your own words explaining how you would define what a cult is.
Great question. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, there's some disagreement in like the cult community, the cult sort of survivor and recovery kind of community itself about what how to define a cult. But for me, I take it as to be a sort of what you might call a totalist environment, where usually you would have, and then again, there's some dispute about this, but usually you would have a leader, a sort of guru or head figure that everyone would sort of look up to, and they would usually be sort of deified and seen as sort of like an all-knowing person who you'd have to obey. And then you'd have it's a very hierarchical structure, and you'd have leaders below that who had sort of been enforcing the leader's will, and a lot of it revolves around what you call thought reform, which Robert J. Lifton talked about in terms of like communist China and the brainwashing techniques they tried to use, or what you call brainwashing or thought reform techniques they tried to use on people to get them to convert to sort of Maoist communism. But so a lot of it has come from that. But like it's about so controlling the environment so that you have limited access to information outside of the group. It's about using like different tools and techniques to manipulate you into believing the cult's ideology and to following their direction and to not questioning things. It usually involves a lot of loaded language or cults sort of speak and words that they've either made up or they've have made their own meanings from existing words, so that these words can be like thought-stopping cliches or stuff that would stop you from questioning the group again, and make you feel like you're sort of this clique, sort of us versus them. And yeah, and I think it's usually based around, it can be based around religion, it can be based around self-help, it can be based around, there's so many things that can be based around. I think that's one of the biggest variables. People mostly think it's to do with religious sort of beliefs, but there's so many different types of cult. As many as there are different types of like, I don't know, interests and activities, really. So yeah, I guess that sort of sums it up, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because I guess for me, my main awareness of cults has been, the very big stories. So we're talking about like the Manson family and Branch Davidian, the Waco
Yeah.
incident. And they're very well popularized, but I'm not sure how accurate they are of the everyday cult, because they seem to me like they're really quite an extreme example of.
Yeah, and that is the problem in terms of how people think of cults, is that they usually think of those extremist examples because those are the ones that the media likes to talk about and likes to make documentaries about, things like that, because it's the most, it's a sensationalist sort of thing. And but not every, there's a spectrum of sort of destructiveness, I guess, from like the extreme destructiveness at one end of the spectrum, where you have the Jonestown and that mass suicide, or not even mass suicide, I wouldn't even call it suicide, but that enforced killing of people, basically. And then on the other end you have what people might call, but I don't know if a benign cult exists, but there's some people that believe that that is the case. But but there could be a cult, like the ones that I was in, I would say kind of rest in maybe the middle and lower end of the spectrum, maybe, if that makes any sense. But there, it wasn't like there was the sort of what happened with Jonestown or anything like that. There wasn't mass murder or things like that. There is such a spectrum, but it really depends on what you're sort of looking at, because there can still be people harmed, but it may not be in the way that a media story might be interested in, if that makes sense. Like, it's not as a story about a group of people dying as much more like interesting to the media, for example, than someone who might die from depression or mental health issues years and years after they've been in a group, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
you've mentioned that you have some experience of your own with cults, and obviously we're here to talk about neurodivergent people and cults. Are there any aspects of your own experience you'd be comfortable to share on this live stream?
I'm happy sharing, whatever. Honestly, I've shared so much about it before, so I mean, what in particular would you want?
Well, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about your own journey into cult survivorship and how that interplayed with your neurodivergent identity.
So into cults, or into like the advocacy stuff that I do now, do you mean?
Yeah,
okay. So so when I came out of the groups that I was in, it took me a while to realize I was in a cult in the first place, which I think is quite common. And so it was in lockdown, actually, that I started researching, and I first listened to this podcast called The Orgasm Cult, which was a BBC podcast, One Taste, which is one of the groups I was in. And I realized I'd had a lot of anger before that. But it's like when you actually research it and you realize what was done to you, that's when I really started to get like just really angry and upset, and it was quite traumatizing, because it's like you fully realize what happened to you, and what you put up with, and what you feel like this group is getting away with, and one of the group Landmark continues to get away with, and people are not really reporting it that much. And so but when I was reading the cult recovery literature, I found that a lot of the emphasis, and I know why this is because there's such a shame around being a cult survivor and being associated with cults. That's part of the reason why people are silent about it. They don't want to speak about it, because it's like seen as this, how could you fall for that? How could you be in a group like that? That's weird, or whatever. Like, people don't want to be associated with that. And what I found then in the cult recovery literature was there was this push to kind of say that all people who are, people who join cult or people who get involved in cults are normal people. There's this, a big emphasis on we're just normal people, we're intelligent, we're professionals, we're creatives, we're idealists or whatever. And which idealists, again, for me, that's a trait that's actually quite neurodivergent. But I just saw that there was this push to sort of to push this narrative about being normal, and it didn't really chime with me. I would never call myself normal. I would never want to be called normal. Not in the way that people perceive normality anyway, which to me is very much normality for me is very neurotypical and heteronormative and default white. For me, that's normal, and so for me, my advocacy really came about because I just felt like no one was really talking or writing about that association of neurodivergence and being in cults. Because from what I saw, there was a lot of people who were neurodivergent, and sure, there may be more people who go and get into a cult. But what I noticed was that the people who really stay and go on for years and years in these cults and go to other cults like cult hopping, I found a lot of them were neurodivergent people. And I saw that there was so many reasons for that, which I don't know if you want me to get into now, but that wasn't being talked about. And I think there was a big blind spot, or there's a big gap in like ignorance around like what neurodivergent is in the cult recovery community. And I didn't understand why people weren't actually making these connections, because to me it seemed really obvious. It just seemed really obvious. And I thought, well, if no one else is going to talk about it, I'll talk about it. And that's how it sort of came about. So I just started writing about it on Facebook, and I started I did a blog about it for this intersectional conference, and it just kind of spiraled from there. Like I just started doing more talks, and it was at the International Cult Association. So yeah.
Okay. So you mentioned there's this sort of big gap in the knowledge around why neurodivergent people might get involved with cults. Now, for someone in my position, it almost seems kind of obvious that we'd be a bit vulnerable to this, because we're a community that desperately wants community.
Yes, exactly.
We can be very isolated, but I wonder if you might expand a little bit about some of the reasons you found why neurodivergent people might be drawn into cults.
So I can talk about from my experience and what I think maybe would apply to other people, but for me, that community, that's one of the biggest draws, and it's one of the biggest things that keeps you in it, is that sense of community and because when you go into it at first, there's this huge sort of there's a lot of love bombing, which is when they sort of shower you with all this love and attention and what seems like unconditional acceptance. People saying, "Oh, Priscilla, you're so great. You're so amazing. Oh, we love you, Priscilla, la, la, la." And when you've come from this mindset of feeling like, oh, what's wrong with me? I hate myself. Because I came into cults. That's another big factor, is that I didn't know I was neurodivergent when I was going into these cults. And so I was still trying to work out what's wrong, almost like quote unquote wrong with me. And I didn't have that insecure, like that inner self-esteem. I felt like I was a bit of a weirdo, almost like I was too much. I was called intense, and going into a cult, you meet so many other people who are just kind of just as intense, I would say. Like, and I reclaim intense as a good word. Just for now, that. And you meet all these people who don't want to do small talk and just want to have these like straight in there with these philosophical discussions about like the meaning of life and what we can do to change society and make a difference, and love and sex and death, and these are all stuff that all this stuff that I would talk about anyway. But it's like you just have a willing group of people who want to talk about these things and think about stuff that is like maybe other people wouldn't be so into talking about or thinking about. And that's a massive draw, is that acceptance, the feeling of acceptance, and which obviously is not real, really. But yeah, and feeling like you're part of something bigger than you, and is that sense of like when you have a mission and a purpose. Because I think when you're sort of feeling very chaotic inside, it's like I'm not sure what's going on with you. It's like you almost feel like you need something outside of you to sort of focus you, to make you feel like you have something to live for, and something that's important. And I was always feeling like I was one of those people who wanted to do something important. That was, and they definitely latch on to that. Yeah, there's just so many things. There's that feeling of like, well, how could someone be so cruel and manipulative and lie about this stuff? So taking people at their word at face value, and not thinking that they were trying to manipulate you, just thinking, oh, they're just really interested in me and they're asking all these questions, and to another person it might be, well, this is a bit intrusive, like, why are you asking all these personal questions? But to me it's like, oh, great, like, and then you just overshare anyway. So it's like, I'm telling you all this information that you can then sort of use against me to get me involved, and be like, oh, you like this, or you this is your goal in life, or you've had this issue, we can help you with that, and I think there's that, and that structure, it's that sense of structure that's a big thing, because again, with the chaos and feeling chaotic and feeling like unorganized and not able to like really like organize myself in a way I would like, is having that sort of almost like, well, this is where you're going to be at this time, and this is what you're going to do at this time, and having your weekends like, you're going to be at this weekend course or whatever, that's going to be all scheduled for you, and because for me, unfilled time, it can be quite terrifying.
Yeah.
I like to fill my time up, and I hate having unscheduled time and feeling like I don't know what I'm doing because there's too many things I could be doing, so I don't do anything, like anything, or I am left in my thoughts, and I don't want to be left in my thoughts, so it really like fills your time up, and in a way that becomes very unhealthy, but like it at first feels like, oh yeah, I'm actually doing something, things are structured for me, this is great. You don't have to think about it too much, I'm just going to be here, like. So yeah, I think that was a big part of it, and yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else, like there's a
It's
lot.
funny because you've hit all the points. Someone commented, cherished cat on YouTube said has to be due to security, routine, and community. And in your description, you've pretty much hit all those points. But what it also got me thinking about was, it sounds an awful lot like the sort of coercive control techniques you hear about in domestic violence cases. It
Yeah,
sounds like there's a lot of crossover between the sorts of techniques and behaviors that people are using to manipulate people. And I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, it almost seems as if, cults use those coercive control techniques, but on like a grander scale.
yeah, no, definitely, it's the same techniques really, and what it comes down to me is down to really, for me, is like narcissistic abuse as well, is when you have these leaders who are sort of malignant narcissists, and people aiding them who are also sort of narcissistic or taking on their sort of narcissistic characteristics, um and there's that whole giving love and then taking it away, and then you know, sort of shouting at people and making them feel bad and making them feel like they need to actually do better to gain that love again, because that love again, that's an addictive feeling, that feeling of love, that's a very intense and addictive feeling, and it's like that's the other thing that I didn't mention before, is chasing, is like chasing those highs, and so that feeling of love is part of it, but then they also engineer these experiences like highs, like in my cult they had this guided meditation where it was just very intense, and it was like getting you to feel fear around everything and everyone, and then getting you to feel like everything is a joke, and then getting you to feel like love, and so it's all these intense bonding experiences that engineered sort of highs, like you were on a drug, basically, and I know some cults also use drugs, but that's like, it's similar to domestic abuse, and in sort of, you'll have those peak moments in love which make you feel like you're high, or and you couldn't be more in love, and then if that's taken away from you, it's like, oh, I need to get that back, so it's all these techniques that are used.
That interests me as someone who has a significant personal and academic interest in substance use, because one of the sort of key things for me when I was using in addiction was that it was like being in love with the drug, and I was constantly chasing that peak moment where that full of love moment, but never quite getting there. But because I never quite got back to that first experience, it kept me coming back for more. And I think neurodivergent people, like especially if we're sort of autistic and ADHD, we want those highs, don't we? Because
Yeah.
as you mentioned yourself, we don't do well with unfilled time. We don't do
No.
well with the lack of stimulation. And sometimes
Yeah,
we survive off of chaos. And it sounds like it's almost like an engineered chaos within a cult. It sounds like they're
yeah.
literally engineering these really chaotic experiences that keep you coming back even during those low moments when you're questioning why you're even doing it.
Yeah, and the thing is also is that even those low moments, that most cults, I think that a common technique is to turn those low moments around and to say that if you're feeling any kind of discomfort or anything like that, that's all part of your personal growth. That's a
Yeah.
massive thing in cults, to be like, oh, that discomfort you're feeling, well, that's where you need to go, because that's where the most change happens, is that in that moment of feeling fear or disgust or whatever it is, because that's where you need to go and gain your personal growth, and then you'll transform and everything will be better. So yeah, I think it's very manipulative, the way they will sort of shape those experiences for you. So even like while you're trying to articulate what even happened to you, they're telling you what's happened to you.
And I suppose for neurodivergent people who've probably been gaslit their whole life anyway, it's almost like that behavior has been normalized to them anyway. So you don't necessarily realize that's what's being done to you, because this is how everyone has treated you growing up.
Yeah, no, exactly. And it's because I think one of the things I got from Landmark that I thought was empowering was this sense of like, I can take control of my life, because all of the time it was like I felt like out of control and like quite helpless a lot of times. And I wanted to feel that sense of control, because all around you is this idea that you can overcome your weaknesses, and if you just be determined and disciplined, then you can do this. And I thought, well, I just felt like this cult, well, maybe this will help me with my disciplines, will help me with like just managing my life basically. So yeah, I don't know what point I was but yeah, it's that sort of feeling that they try to get you to think, well, if you join a cult, then you will be in control, and you'll get what you want, and everything will be okay. And outside of the group, well, that's just chaos. That's that out there is just scary, and that is very real as a neurodivergent person, like you say, when the real world seems so hostile, and there's so many rules that are just unwritten and unspoken, and like just things seem so hard to get a job and to get a relationship, and everything just seems, and like, oh, we're offering you these 3 steps for transformation or whatever, and obviously it's not just 3 steps really, but it seems like, oh, there's a simple sort of guidelines for life that I can just follow, and that's great.
Yeah.
You don't get that in real life.
And I think also, for neurodivergent people, if they're monotropic, which I haven't met an autistic or ADHD person so far who doesn't sort of have a monotropic approach to life. We've got that intense sort of hyper focus, and that's sort of encouraged, isn't it, in the cult landscape, because they want you to be entirely focused on what they're doing, what they want you to achieve.
Yeah, it's like an advantage to them, that because other people, they may not go as intensely focused on this one thing, but when you're really in something, you're really in it, and it's hard to think about much else. I mean, it's just it's an asset to cults, really, because they want someone with that absolute drive, and just that obsession, almost that obsessiveness about what they're doing, to be like going around telling, oh, this great group, you should join, they're amazing, you can't stop talking about it, and it's just everything, and that is a big asset to cults, definitely.
Because autistic people in particular, if we find something that we think is amazing, we want to share it with people. We love to share things that make us happy. So if we're being amped up into this big frenzy of, you know, highs and lows, and I've got control of my life and all these amazing things. We then do what the cult wants us to do, which is we take it to other people and tell them about it, because that's become our world.
Yeah, it's just like, it's just one of those things that it completely takes over your life, and you can't really, in a way that it's like you just can't get another perspective then. And so it, people might say that, like, well, why couldn't you just look it up? Or like, why couldn't you just do some research and like, why didn't you just listen to other people who are saying this is a bad thing? But when you're in that mindset, it's really hard to hear that.
Yeah.
And you just think, well, you don't understand, you're not in it, this group has changed my life, I was so depressed before, they made me feel great about myself. And those peak experiences and everything, that's what you remember. You don't, and that's what you think about, and you don't think, oh well, maybe actually this is about, like, maybe what they're saying is true, because you're just so in it. And you're even like saying, they would say, oh, don't go on this website because of the, Rick Ross's critic, he doesn't know, he wasn't in it, like blah blah blah. And I could have literally just gone on the website and I would have found all of these stories about the group and been like, oh crap. But because I just listened to what they said and I said, okay, sure, like I didn't even question it, because it's just so like enamored with the organization and thinking that this was the thing that was going to help me and help humanity. Like, I just couldn't even take any negative feedback in. I just, because my family did try to intervene, and my sister was trying to say like this is a pyramid scheme. It just didn't go in. I just didn't go in at all. I was just like deflect. And it's like you have to be sort of in the place willing to accept feedback.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people come at it from like, this is a bad thing, and then not wanting to understand why you're in it in the first place.
I think this leads neatly, though, into the sort of next question, which is, so you're neurodivergent, you've realized you're in a cult. What's unique about trying to escape that cult as a neurodivergent person?
What's unique? What's unique? Can you, how do you mean? Sorry.
Well, I mean, is there anything particularly about being neurodivergent that makes the escape process more complicated? The way the way your brain works, the way you relate to the world. Is there anything in particular that, for example, for you as a neurodivergent cult survivor, was there anything that made it quite difficult?
Yeah.
Maybe in a way that wouldn't be difficult to someone who is neurotypical.
Yeah, no, I think it goes to what I was saying before about the power of community.
Yeah.
And I definitely think that was a massive part of it, is that even if you didn't agree with some of the things that they were saying and like what you were being told to do and everything else, there were people in that group that you felt like you were really good friends with, and you felt like I felt like if I left the group, then I wouldn't see them again, or I wouldn't see them as much, or I would lose a whole group of people that I felt like I'd connected with. And again, you're going out, it's that phobia of going out into the world that they would implant in you, that's like, well, if you go out there, it's like, who have you got? You don't have that support, like what you think of as almost like a support system. And it feels like I felt like I would just be sort of going back to being left to my own devices and not in a good place again, and feeling like I was getting nowhere, and because I'd been struggling with getting a job, I'd been struggling with relationships, all of that. And I felt like, well, if I get out now, then maybe I'll just undo all of the self-development and good work I've done, despite everything. And that's why people cult hop as well. It's just what I did was go from one cult to another, because they're trying to find this community still, this sense of community, and think, well, this one didn't work out, that maybe this one's better. This is what I need right now. Oh, I need something to do with sexuality because I haven't explored that. Or, do you know what I mean? Oh, I need something to do with whatever because that other cult didn't really address it properly or didn't address it well. So you just kind of go from one community to another because you're not actually analyzing it, and you're just thinking, oh, well, they just weren't so, they just weren't for me or whatever.
Yeah. So for me, it starts to, because I talk about in my recovery from addiction, one of the key moments was finding the autistic community. And I wonder if perhaps for neurodivergent cult survivors, whether finding neurodivergent community could be a good way of healing from that
Definitely.
experience.
I think so. Yeah. For me, I only I only found out I was ADHD really after I left both of the groups and wasn't really involved anymore, and went traveling, and then finding the neurodivergent community. I mean, it made me realize so many things about myself, because my first cult, for example, the landmark, that was all about, a lot of it was about being in integrity and being on time, and so if you're not on time, then you have to restore integrity in the room and all this kind of stuff, like basically making you feel guilty for being unorganized. And I always wonder why, like, why can I do it sometimes? I can do it sometimes, and then other times I'm just out again, and I'm out of integrity again. And then so realizing about the neurodivergence, it made me realize, oh, okay, like there's a reason why I struggle so much with time management and organization, and why I'm so, like, I feel so intensely about stuff, and it makes much more sense. And so I guess if you don't have that, if you don't realize you're neurodivergent, then again, you'll be more likely to want to look for answers or look for something outside of yourself, like a community that could lead you the wrong way, down the wrong path, because you haven't really realized what it is you actually need, or what it is that is going to actually help you, rather than some sort of alternative healing, culturally appropriated whatever, like I don't know, like breath cleansing ritual. I have no idea. But like all the things that have been offered at the moment in alternative wellness areas. But yeah, so I think it's really important, and you find that community there, and you can feel like there is a community there that can accept you and understand you, and not everyone, of course, but like finding that group of people is really important, and knowing that you're not alone, knowing that there are other people like you that have the same values and believe just intensely as you do about stuff, and can have these also like amazing conversations. Yeah, that's really important.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
It,
yeah,
it sounds like there's in Landmark, from what you've described, it sounds like there's almost like a neuronormativity going on. Don't be late, do this, do that. You have to do things this way. And like I talk a lot in my work about neuronormativity on like a societal scale, but this sounds like it's almost like what happens when you compress it into a group.
yeah.
And it sounds like a lot of the standards that perhaps this cult had were based around what they wanted people to be, regardless of how comfortable it was for them.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I did talk, one of my one of the talks I did, which I did at the International Cultic Studies Association, was talking about this idea of ideology, and how cults are a microcosm or of a macrocosm of beliefs. So like how Landmark was very much the neoliberal sort of individualist cult,
Yeah,
and in that sort of neoliberal ideology, um there's no sense of socio-economic factors, right? Everything that happens to you is because you brought it on yourself. You have to take responsibility. It doesn't matter what that is that's happened to you, whether that's because of, racism or ableism or misogyny, that things, crap has happened to you. It's like, if you try to even go there with saying, oh, these things happen that are like, not really in my control at all times, then it's like, oh, you're playing the victim. And it's a very like victim blaming ideology. And yeah, so there's a lot of ableism within that, which tells you that it's like you just have to overcome stuff with their sort of ideology and steps, and positive thinking almost. It's like, don't be so negative about stuff. You need to I don't know. It's that sort of very individualist thing where, we're not like, if you, I can't even imagine what they would say if you tried to say I've got ADHD or whatever. They'd probably just be like, oh, that's just your story, probably. Or they would say, oh, well, that doesn't really matter. You're more than that, blah, blah, blah. You're making that into like your whole thing kind of thing.
Yeah. It's interesting because I've come across attitudes like this in sort of substance use recovery communities. You shouldn't be angry at people for the awful things they've done to you because this is how it's your own fault. And it's interesting how these sorts of ideologies build up around vulnerable people. But not only do they build around vulnerable people, but their foundations are placed firmly in making vulnerable people feel responsible for the bad things that have happened to them.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, well, I mean, let's put it in another way. If Landmark, or just let me put turn on the light, she's a bit dark here, sorry. If these like cults and groups were actually to tell a more nuanced and complex story about what happens to us as marginalized people, then they would have to admit that their programs are not going to solve everything, wouldn't they? And what Landmark and the other cult I was in, one case, would do is just say, well, whatever problem you have, it doesn't matter how big or how small, just follow these steps, do these courses, and it will be transformed. And if it's not being transformed, that's your fault. That's because you're not following the steps, and you need to go and get coaching, or you need to do this course, whatever. You need to spend more time here. That's it, really. So if they were to say, oh, actually, there's some social factors beyond your locus of control that we can't really solve in a weekend course, and maybe it wouldn't be so appealing.
You can almost see their own contradictions, though, when you look at it from the outside, where they've got this neoliberal, self-reliant ideology surrounded by this real one-size-fits-all approach of just do the things we say, and it doesn't matter what your individual circumstances are, your life will be fixed.
Yeah.
And I'm interested, I guess, in how do they hide that contradicting ideas when you're in it? Like, how do they obfuscate that truth that they contradict themselves?
So is that idea that, so it's like you're all your own fault, whatever happens to you, but yet they still have a power to change your life? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, so you've got that very neoliberal idea of you are responsible for what happens in your life.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what's happened to you, it's your fault. You brought it on yourself. But also, despite these individual experiences that were because of you, this very one-size-fits-all approach of do this course or do this practice will work no matter who you are.
That's interesting. I haven't really thought about it in that way. Yeah, I don't even know if they do get through. Actually say that contradiction. To be honest, a lot of what they talk about makes no sense anyway. If you actually to like analyze what they said to you, but because they bombard you with so much information, that's part of the manipulation. Is that you can't even take it all in anyway.
Yeah.
And then if you try to sort of understand it, then they'll just confuse you further by giving you contradictory explanations about stuff. It's like, okay, I'll take one example. The whole thing about being in integrity, they have this whole thing. Okay, so like, obviously for me that is designed to make you feel guilty and to make you sort of compliant and follow the rules. But then they have this whole other thing, which is another layer on top of that, which is saying, oh, don't make yourself bad and wrong though. Yeah, don't make yourself bad. If you're out of integrity, are you making yourself bad and wrong? So then if you're feeling guilty, then you're making yourself bad and wrong, and then you're feeling even worse because then you're not meant to make yourself bad and wrong. And so it's just you going around in circles with this sort of closed logic.
So it's sort of like not being able to see the wood for the trees. That's their approach, really, is just bombard you with so much information that trying to unpick it and disprove any of it becomes almost an impossibility.
Yeah, and they'll always have an explanation. It doesn't matter how absurd it is. But usually it all come down to, well, you're just not following it properly, or you don't understand properly. Oh, you'll get it when you do this course. You'll get it.
And you can really start to see how neurodivergent people get sucked into this then, because we're not people who enjoy processing loads of information all at once, and you are being bombarded with loads of information all at once. So you just trust the overarching message they're trying to give you, because, well, these people are giving me a community, they're giving me connection. That's how it seems to me. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, and because when you look at the forum, which is the first landmark weekend course, I mean, I think it used to be longer. I think it used to be like week, or I can't remember, but now it's like from Friday to Sunday, but it's like 9 a.m. till like it can go on till like past midnight. They don't even have an end time. They'll just say around 11:30 or around 11, or they won't even give you an end time, because they really don't care. They just want to make you so tired, and then away. And even like when you're going home, you're meant to do homework for the next day, so you don't even have time to like think, or like, actually, what was that? Let me just look this up. What was that? You're like just too busy thinking, oh, I have to do this homework. How am I going to fit this in between actually sleeping and getting to this like course again tomorrow? And even in the breaks, they'd give you homework to do, like call someone you've lost connection with, repair your connections, all this kind of stuff. And then it's like, if you had a good experience with that, well, that was landmark. You wouldn't have called that person if it wasn't landmark. And then again, someone else to recruit into the organization. So it's all for a purpose, but it also just keeps you constantly busy, not able to reflect, not able to review, tired, sleep deprived. All of that is part of the manipulation.
So we're sort of coming to the end of our time now, but sort of to wrap it up, if someone was watching this who had questions about whether they were in a cult or was perhaps trying to escape one, would there be any sort of advice you'd give them?
I would say just find out as much as you can about this group that you're in, and cults in general. I'd say that one of the best resources for me has been the cult. I think it's called the Cult Education Institute. It's Rick Ross's website, and because it has a load of forums on there about all different types of cults, and so there you have like first-hand survivors sharing their stories, sort of anonymous, under like usernames and things like that. But you can interact with people, you can message people, you can just find out more about what's actually happening in this organization. And like, you can read books. Yanya Lalick has a book. I think it's called Take Back Your Life. Rick Ross has a book, Cults Inside Out. Podcasts, some really good podcasts out there. Indoctrination is one I appeared on. That's hosted by a therapist who specializes in cults and that sort of coercive control dynamic. And there's loads of resources. I really love the Heaven Gates podcast, but there's just so many. I'm happy to share like resources and whatever if anyone wants to contact me.
And speaking of contacting you, you're on social media, aren't you?
Yeah.
So would Twitter be the place to find you, or
Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, on all those.
Okay. Well, it's been a really good episode, Priscilla. Thank you very much. I've learned a lot, and it's definitely given me some stuff to think about in my own work, both.
And we have to do that academy.
Professional. Yes, we do need to do that academy live stream. We keep talking about it.
Yeah,
we never quite get it done.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's so many other things we could talk about.
It's two ADHDers trying to plan something.
Right.
Well, thank you very much, Priscilla. It's been a really good episode. I've really enjoyed it. Now's the bit where we wave awkwardly whilst we wait for the live stream to end. So thank you, everyone who has listened. And next week, we're going live to talk about the new mental health bill, which is coming in to replace the original Mental Health Act. And we're going to be thinking about how that's going to impact upon autistic people. That's with Rachel Gavin. It should be a really good episode, so please do make sure you check it out. Also, I will be live on Academy tomorrow evening, so that's Wednesday the 6th. of September 2023. So yeah, please do check those out. And in the meantime, thank you for listening. Goodbye.